Hey, what's up guys? It's your man Foryam again, back with a new guide for V Rising. This one is gonna be a little bit more in-depth, because today I want to take the time and talk about the best weapon, or better put, the best weapons in the game. As I saw quite some information on the interwebs which gives you a pretty poor answer of this very question. Some people don't cover the most important aspects of weapons, only talk about the DPS or very specific situations. But some people only prefer to play PvE, want to know what's the best versus big packs of trash mobs, or want to use against bosses, while we also have PvP, in which many weapons are very viable as well, so you can't just say this is the best. In this more in-depth video, I will talk about all the different weapons from maces to slashers and even the crossbows, compare their strengths in different situations, rank their abilities and share what I think is the best blood to combine with it. So guys, let's get right to it. Alright, so before we get started, it would be very much appreciated if you can leave a like at the end of the video if you found it useful, and of course also leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Today we're going to talk about all the top tier weapons, the best weapons which you can get your hands on in the game as of right now, the Sanguine set, the maces, slashers, the axe, sword, the reaper, spear, as well as the crossbow, and we're also going to talk about the general soul reaper because I think this is without doubt a top tier weapon as well. I'm also going to cover the best blood for the different weapons, what is best for different situations because we have both PvE and PvP, so let's get right to it. Alright, so first off we have the Sanguine Mace. This one is probably the hardest hitting weapon in the game. It is slightly slower, and this also means it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to consistently hit your targets in PvE, but especially PvP, but it also comes with some pretty interesting abilities. The first one is your ground slam or leap, pretty much, a crushing blow, which deals some physical damage on the ground and also inflict snare on your enemies if you hit them, while the second one, smack, knocks back your enemies and also incapacitates them for 2 seconds. Personally, I am not a huge fan of this weapon because I think the abilities aren't fantastic for either PvE or PvP, but yeah, this is mainly one which I just have with me to gather resources, break those nodes of iron and silver. Next up, we have the Sanguine Slashers. By the way, guys, I'm going to talk about all the best blood in combination with these weapons afterwards, but this is without doubt a fan favorite, as most people love to play with its weapon because of its high attack speed and also the set of skills it comes with. So this is without doubt the very opposite of the maces. High attack speed will make it easier to consistently hit your enemies, deal a lot of damage, and it also comes with some pretty interesting abilities. So the first one is called Elusive Strike. If you cast this one, you basically dash forward and backward, dealing damage to all the enemies which you pass through, and I personally think this one is especially handy in taking all those cotton with you in no time. While the second one is probably the ability why many people want to use this weapon in PvP is the camouflage, because this one basically puts you into stealth, and in this time window you want to hit an enemy so you can basically stun them. But this ability is not only interesting to stun enemies but also to just disengage, sneak away, run into the woods, get out line of sight basically. While the camouflage is without doubt one of the best abilities in the game, I am not a huge fan of this weapon because of the first one. I mean, Elusive Strike does feel a little bit odd sometimes, and this is maybe because I am a huge fan of the axes. So basically, the axes are a third weapon. My favorite weapon, which I also made different builds for, which you can find in the top right of the screen for endgame high damage for PvE and PvP. But the Sanguine Axes are also one that hit like a truck and have a pretty good attack speed, while they also come with insanely good skills. I personally think that the skills of this weapon are the best in the game. Not only for PvE but also for PvP, because not only gives it a lot of crowd control but also hit like a truck, basically make you a berserker on the battlefield. So the first one is the dash. This one is called Frenzy. Every time when you hit an enemy with this, it will increase your movement and attack speed for a short time. It's not much, just 0.8 seconds, but this can definitely help to land some extra hits quickly, deal a little bit of extra damage. While it's also a very great weapon to not only engage enemies, but also disengage, to just run away from situations a lot quicker. It's basically a second travel ability in my opinion, because yeah, maneuverability is great with this weapon, but the second ability for this weapon makes it even better. So we have the Axe Strike. Allows you to deal a lot of physical damage and slow your enemies for 1.5 seconds, but if you hit the axes, you basically even stun them. And you can stun multiple targets with it, not just one. So you just throw your axes, and if the two axes hit at the same time on your target, well, they will get stunned, but everything in between basically also gets slowed and it will lose some HP. So this one is great to deal with big packs of mobs, basically stun the high value target in the rear while you clear the trash in front. Next up, we have the Sanguine Swords, and these are also very interesting in many different situations for both PvE and PvP, because the attack speed is very nice for reliable hits, but the abilities it comes with. The first one, the Whirlwind, is great to deal with trash mobs, deal a lot of AoE damage, while the second one is basically a projectile which you shoot. Has a pretty fast travel time, and at the same time it also allows you to leap onto an enemy, basically knock it up in the air if you recast it, and then you will land a couple hits, not a lot of damage, but it's also a great one to CC. Basically pick out an enemy target, especially for PvP, knock it in the air so it doesn't have the ability to escape. Next up, we have the Sanguine Reaper, and boy oh boy, it's a great weapon, but I basically never use it, because we also have the General Soul Reaper in play, guys. Don't get me wrong, the Sanguine Reaper is nice, and of course it deals a lot more damage. It's basically a very good weapon to deal with undead mobs, but the General Soul Reaper, in my opinion, is even better to deal extra spell damage and have even more critical strike chance on them, because the skills this weapon comes with basically are great for caster builds. So you want to avoid combat at all times. With the first ability, you can knock back enemies, deal some damage, and it doesn't do that much. It basically snares the enemies, while the second one is a spinning attack. And if you hit the projectile, it will also slow your enemies, but that's basically what you want to focus on with the Reapers. You want to focus on that CC, slowing down your enemies, snaring them, and that can also be achieved with the General Soul Reaper, but instead you will also have those bonuses to spell power and critical strike chance. So I think this one is going to be a lot more interesting if you have a build that heavily focuses on spell damage. So your physical damage output is going to be low anyways with these skills, while you do have the bonus to making your spells a lot more powerful. Next up, we have the Sanguine Spear. I think this one is great to use as well. Very nice to deal with creatures like bears and wolves, especially in the early stages of the game. Most people will be playing with a spear, and this can also be used to take out nodes like ores a lot faster, because the first ability hits the target so many times it will be very efficient. And then we also have the second ability, the Harpoon or Spear Throw, let's say, which is a fantastic ability if you land it, but that is the problem. It's not very simple to do that, especially in PvP. Let me just drink a potion right here because we're running out of blood. But this one is a pretty difficult one to hit, and most times you will miss this one, especially in PvP situations. So you basically only have one ability, and that, in my opinion, doesn't make it very interesting. Then, last but not least, we have the Sanguine Crossbow, and wow, yeah, I've seen so much hate for crossbows. I have to agree, they aren't fantastic for, let's say, constant DPS or consistently hitting targets in PvP. In PvP, it's probably the most useless weapon of all, but they can be very useful, especially in the early game or in late game if you're just doing PvE. The first ability is a pretty nice AoE. You can just aggro all the enemies, while with the second one you will deal some damage, inflict a snare as well. You can interrupt casts with it as well, which sounds pretty good. But in general, all the spell casting in this game is basically instant. Not many things are channels, except for, let's say, something like the Crimson Beam, which nobody uses in the first place. Crossbows can definitely be nice if you're having some trouble in PvE, if you want to just aggro some mobs, run away, and then use another weapon to finish them off. But in general, I wouldn't recommend using these for PvP. By the way, the first ability can also be nice to take out enemies on a grave if you're spawning them in your own garden, so you don't have to open up the gate and take them down with melee hits. So now that we've got that out of the way, we talked about the pros and cons of all weapons, let's focus on the blood, because we have different types of blood which are going to be very interesting for different weapons. But for most of them, you definitely want to be using the warrior blood, because it increases your physical power with your attacks, reduces the cooldown on your weapon skills, which basically vastly boosts your damage output, because you'll be able to use those abilities a lot more frequently, while this also works for the crossbow, by the way. But next up, we also have the reduced damage taken when striking at full HP and increased damage, which is most of the times not gonna happen. But chance to parry attacks and reduce the damage taken, boy oh boy, this is gonna be hands down the most interesting blood type to use for these weapons. Boost all the effects above by 30% if you're on 100% is very nice as well. So for which weapons you want to use the warrior blood? Well, definitely for the maces, also for the axes, for the sword itself, for the spear, and yeah, probably also for the crossbow. While for the sanguine slashers, you actually want to have something different. The rogue blood, and we're just gonna drink this one so I can show you exactly what I mean with this. So for the rogue blood, you basically get an increased critical strike chance on weapons, increased movement speed, reduced cooldown on your travel skill. So this is what makes it very nice with the slashers. It will also give you a 100% chance to land a critical strike on your next ability after using this travel skill, and also the chance to critical strike to expose victims' armor and further increase their damage taken from all the sources for 4 seconds, guys. That is pretty brutal. So if we look at the tier 3 once again, you will have a 100% chance to critical strike on your next physical attack after using your travel, so you will always apply this debuff, this expose armor on your enemies for 4 seconds if you land it. So you just use this ability, hit your enemies, gonna give you a lot of crit. And if you can do that with the camouflage, I mean, if you go into stealth, you hit your enemy, and with the stun you crit it, well, of course, with all the other hits, you can basically deal a lot more damage, spam some spells, let's say. I don't have the right ones equipped right now, but you get the idea. Rogue blood is fantastic for the slashers. Not only for the slashers though, because if you're combining it with the axes, your damage output will be even greater as well, with the maces or with your sword. But I do think you lack a lot of survivability when you're drinking this blood, which isn't a huge problem with the slashers, because you still have that disengage, you have the elusive strike, while with, let's say, the maces, you only have one escape ability. So if you have a sticky situation you really have to run away from, and your dash is on cooldown, let's say, that is gonna be a problem. Then, last but not least, we also have the Scholar Blood, and boy oh boy, the Scholar Blood is so great for caster builds, and that of course also brings us to the Scythes. So let's check out all the benefits for this blood type. So for Scholar Blood, 100%. We get 25% increased spell power, 15% reduced cooldown on spells, 10% spell life leech, and a 20% chance to reset the spell cooldown when you cast abilities, which is also very powerful. And on 5, we boost all these effects by another 30%. So with the General Soul Reaper, with the increased spell crit and spell damage, I personally think you should definitely get your hands on something like the Chaos Bolts. And then the second ability, which I've been using a little bit in the past, also very nice one, is this one. See, right now we get a free cast, so we can basically cast it again. And with the Chaos Volley, you basically have one chance. Then with the cooldown, I think, say you combine this with even more lifesteal, you go with the Sanguine Coil. This one can be cast 3 times in a row, so if you get a free cast, that is really nice. And as you can see, the cooldown on this is insane. Once again, we get a free cast right there. So as you can see, after casting these abilities, they recharge very fast with a low cooldown reduction. We can just keep spamming them, and look at that, the free casts, they simply make it even better. But let's just compare these two on paper. So we have the General Soul Reaper, has a spell power of 56, 25% crit chance right here, while the other one only has 20 and 50, but of course it does come with slightly more physical power, which is not gonna be very interesting if you're playing with Reapers. So now my brief conclusion on the best weapons to use for different situations for both PvE and PvP. Well, first of all, I think the Mace is not gonna be top tier. It can be useful for different situations. I'm gonna put it on, let's say, C or B rank, while the slashers are without doubt top tier for PvP, guys. The elusive strike is not my favorite, while we have a insane ability right here, the stealth, which is fantastic to stun enemies or disengage from combat. With Rogue Blood, the dash will also give you extra cooldown, while the axes are a really good all-rounder for any situation, really. You have great damage output with the X strike, while you have extra maneuverability, a good engage and disengage with your first leap attack. And at the same time, the swings also deal a lot of damage, so that is why I think the axes are the best all-round weapon, while the swords can also be very interesting for PvP builds, as you'll be able to just dash to enemies, knock them up into the air, do some free hits, make it impossible for them to escape, let's say. So if you're using Rogue Blood, I think it's gonna be impossible for enemies to escape from you, and you're just gonna spin, let it rip, do some Beyblades while you're at it. I saw some insane builds out there, guys. I saw some best sword builds, they really work well in PvP. While for caster builds, you want to go with a Reaper, and not just the Sanguine Reaper. I personally think if you're gonna focus on using spells only, the General Soul Reaper is gonna be your top tier pick. And yeah, then we also have the Spear. I think this one is less interesting, as even though it can deal a lot of damage with his first ability, the second one is just so difficult to hit. Not only in PvE, but especially in PvP on moving targets. Then last but not least, yeah, we have the crossbow. Guys, seriously, it's not a very good weapon, but it can be useful if you're struggling with PvE and just want to lure some enemies from, let's say, a big pack of mobs and then switch to another weapon to take them out. But that, my friends, is pretty much it. I know it was a lot of information, but if you found this video helpful, if you liked it, make sure to hit that like button. It definitely helps the channel, so a big thanks for that. If you're interested in more V-Rising, my playlist is in the description with a lot more info, with some endgame builds. If you have any questions or doubts, guys, please do let me know in the comments. I want to know which weapons you use in different situations, what your favorite weapon is for PvE, for PvP, so make sure to share that in the comments. We can get a discussion started. Anyways, right now it is 4 AM out. A big thanks for watching, big thanks for sticking till the end. I want to wish you an awesome day. Till next time, peace.